Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi there, welcome to our ongoing discussion on fiction. This is lecture 38. If you can quickly recall, we have been discussing fiction for 3 weeks now. Beginning with a discussion of fiction, we moved on to understanding different types of fiction, different genres of fiction, and narrative techniques used in fiction. And as we had announced in our earlier classes, we are going to begin with a discussion on Animal Farm, a remarkable novel written by George Orwell. I hope by now you have read the novel. It's in fact a novella. Generally it's called a novella, very short novel, because unless we apply all that we have learnt about fiction to one or two works of fiction, our understanding of fiction becomes slightly incomplete, right? That is the reason why I asked all of you to read this small novel. Many of you may have already read it. Even if you haven't read, no problem, but please read it, because of course we will be discussing the novel straight away in this class. Maybe if you haven't read it, please pick up the novel and read it, and then you would be able to understand this discussions all the more better. And for those of you who haven't read it, don't worry, we are going to introduce the novel too in a very detailed manner, and then apply the various narrative techniques we learned, the various elements of fiction we learnt in the class to this particular novel, and see how our understanding of this novel enhances when we apply all that we have learnt about fiction to this particular novel. Okay? Yeah. Animal Farm by George Orwell is considered as a 20th century classic. In fact, one of the critics goes on to the extent of calling it, one of the most widely read 20th century novel. Okay? So, this indicates the iconic status the novel has come to acquire. Well, though when it was published in the 1940s, it did not pick the momentum. In fact, it was not even critically recognized as a major work of fiction. Okay? At the most, critics considered George Orwell a minor writer, and Animal Farm a kind of a second-rate work. It required the second part of the 20th century to reassess the literary importance of George Orwell, especially his Animal Farm, and then reevaluate and recalibrate its own critical standards, and now they have come to call it an iconic work, or an iconoclastic work. All right. Yeah, before we discuss Animal Farm in a little more detailed manner, let us get to know the writer, George Orwell. In fact, George Orwell is an acquired name, and today he is recognized as George Orwell, though he was born Eric Arthur Blair in 1903. Interestingly, he was born in India. Of course, he is an English writer, but he was born in Motihari of Bengal region, the then Bengal region, and in 1903. And today he is considered as a very well-known novelist, essayist, journalist, literary critic, and all that. Okay? He joined Indian civil service and then went on to even serve in Burma as a police officer. And most of these novels that he writes are a fallout of his experiences, extensive travels in South Asia and all these places. Some of his novels include Burmese Days, written in 1934, Homage to Catalonia, 38, Road to Vegan Power in 37. So, these are some of his works. However, George Orwell today is well known for two of his extraordinary novels. In fact, you think of any adjective for the best, well, it would invariably be applicable for these two novels. The first novel is Animal Farm, published in 1945, and just a couple of years later he publishes some kind of a futuristic novel called 1984. This novel is called 1984, published in 1949, in the year 1949. And as I said, more than any other great novel, be it a novel by Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, or anybody, D.H. Lawrence, Charles Dickens, more than any of their novels, these two novels have been widely read, and that's the reason why they are considered as the greatest of the classics that 20th century has published. So, what is the reason behind this kind of popularity? Is it just a part of popular fiction? Is it serious fiction, or is it mainstream fiction? In fact, we discussed these varieties, right? Though it began as a literary fiction, it became a part of the mainstream fiction, considering the huge success it gained, especially in the later part of the 20th century. And today it is called a political allegory. In fact, those of you who have read the novel may even wonder. In fact, it looks like a children's literature work, right? It looks like a children's novel because it makes use of some animals in a farm in England and how they kind of revolt against it. And then establish a farm of their own and all these things. It looks like a work of a children's literature. However, the significance of the novel goes much beyond the scope of children's literature, and today it's called a political allegory. As you know, an allegory is a story or a work of art which tells a story at the surface, whereas the true meaning of it is hidden somewhere in the layers of the text. Unless you read the layers of the text, you and I may not even be able to understand the complete significance of the novel. So, in political allegory, the hidden layers are, the hidden meanings are political in nature. So, that's a broad category this novel belongs to. Of course, it is also called a dystopian fiction. Yeah, we will discuss in a short while what is utopian fiction, what is dystopian fiction and all that. But of course, briefly we had mentioned while discussing apocalyptic fiction and all that, we discussed dystopian fiction, all right. Okay. Yeah. In fact, this political allegory that George Orwell writes in 1945 continues the rich legacy of some other extraordinary works that have come before George Orwell's Animal Farm. In fact, to begin with, Aesop's fables. In fact, Aesop's fables today are a part and parcel of children's literature. They too have lot many hidden meanings, layered meanings. Therefore, it's an allegory. Okay. So, beginning from there, you have an illustrious writer such as Jonathan Swift, especially in Gulliver's Travels. There is a particular section called Houyhnhnms. So, there it is a radical critique of the contemporary society he lived in, using an allegory, a created tale. He critiques in a radical way the then contemporary British society. So, and from there you have Bernard Manuel's The Fable of the Bees and Jean d'Arlap Fontaine's Fables. So, all these works successfully conceal their critique of society using tales concerning animals and bees, birds and other things. Okay. So, this can be said for all fables and political allegories, especially, that they make use of the technique called defamiliarization that we discussed in the previous class, wherein what happens here, when you set the human problems in an animal kingdom, you defamiliarize the readers with the contemporary contextual thing, and once you create that kind of necessary distance, readers would be able to look at it from a fresh perspective. So, that is also one of the techniques that is used in the novel. Okay. And now, generally speaking, considering the significant contribution of a writer, we use terms such as Shakespearean, Homeric traditions, Shakespearean work, Dickensian, Franz Kafka, based on Kafka we say Kafkaesque novel. That's a kind of an utmost tribute you can pay to a writer, because considering the influence of the writer, the kind of style that the writer practiced and perfected, it takes after the writer's name. That's why Shakespearean means something extraordinary, extraordinary craftsmanship. Similarly, today we use the word Orwellian. It's become an extraordinary descriptive term for a very gory, macabre political future. So, when we say that this particular society is Orwellian in nature, we mean it's a highly deadly society, it's highly dictatorial society, something like that. And his works, whether it is 1984, Animal Farm, or some of his other novels, they are characterized by very lucid prose, very crystal clear prose, and biting social criticism, and of course the overall stand of the writer is one of staunch opposition to totalitarianism, dictatorial policies of a system, of a society, and he is an outspoken support, he has an outspoken support for the democratic socialism, as the writer himself has said on several occasions. Okay, so these are some of the characteristic features of Orwellian fiction. Okay, now let's go ahead and discuss the novel as such. Yeah, before that, these are some remarkable quotations that I have compiled here, written by George Orwell, because he is not just a major novelist, he is an extraordinary philosopher of society. Now look what he says, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they don't want to hear. In other words, liberty also entails with it a sort of courage to speak unpalatable truth to those in power. Do we have that? Or do our leaders, when we say our leaders, not just leaders in our country, leaders throughout the world, are they willing to listen to unpalatable truths when we speak it to them, right? Or do they tolerate it, or do they simply push us to prisons, put us behind the bars because we said something that they could not digest? So true value of democracy rests on the fact that those in power should be able to accept harsh critique of their governance. That's what Orwell seems to indicate here. And of course, look at the other one. The imagination, like certain wild animals, cannot be bred in captivity. In order for society to grow, in fact, we have also discussed this, how literary works have always acted as torchbearers of highest democratic values, egalitarian values, and if they are curbed, automatically there is no scope for creativity to bloom. So, for creativity to be in full swing, you need an extraordinary society that can tolerate criticism and all that. Yeah, and I have one more thing. Threats to freedom of speech, writing and action, though often trivial in isolation, are cumulative in their effect, and unless checked, lead to a general disrespect for the rights of the citizen. Well, if there is a society, if there is a political establishment that is intolerant of an idea, that does not encourage free speech, that does not encourage free writing, of course, when we say free speech and writing, responsible speech and writing, you may consider it as a trivial sign, whereas they are symptoms of something morbid in that state, and later they may lead to something drastic. That is the reason why. So, they are indicators of the dangers ahead. If there is a curb on freedom of speech and freedom of expression, they are indicative of the dangers ahead, something like this. These are, there are many more like that. I just thought it would do well before we understand Animal Farm. Yeah. As we said, Animal Farm was published in 1945, a very short novel, probably about 100 pages or so, a couple of pages here and there, not more than that. While during his publication, of course, he faced a lot of criticism, and in fact his manuscript was also turned down by many publishers, because at that point of time, England too was an ally of Russia, and the novel in question is critique of the policies in Russia, and that is the reason why the novel had to face a lot of resistance, and of course in the novel Orwell satirizes the pretensions of the Russian Revolution. In fact, all of us are briefly familiar with the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevist revolution that overthrew the oppressive government of the czars and tried to establish a government formed by the proletariat. That is a kind of a dream. The dream of communism found its first political manifestation in Russia, because especially they were Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, they were all influenced by the ideals of Karl Marx. Therefore, probably the first political manifestation of Karl Marx ideas is found in Russia. Unfortunately, that model did not sustain. It is for very unfortunate reason. The revolution, though had extraordinary ideals, it could not sustain when it comes to reality. Probably the revolution, the ideology could not factor in the realities, the harsh realities. Anyhow, it is a sad story. So, through this novel, Orwell portrays how power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You have heard of this statement, right? So, using the fable, using the story of animals that happen in a particular farm in England, he categorically denounces all authoritarian regimes, all dictatorship, and all these things. So, this is in general Animal Farm. Of course, we have already discussed its critical reception. During its time, it was not very well received. It was only in the later part of the 20th century it came to be called a great work. Now, if I can tell you an entire story, the story of this whole novel using pictures, this is something like this. That is why I call this slide, infographic tale of Animal Farm, infographic tale. Now, you have major characters here. You have old Major, it was his dream, animalism, the concept of animalism. Of course, we are going to discuss that slightly later. Is out of the dreams and visions of the old Major. Then you have Snowball, who is a major character, who is a major follower of the old Major, and you have Napoleon and Squealer, who are also part of the ruling elite, pigs. And then you have Benjamin, who is basically a cynic. In fact, Benjamin the donkey is a cynic. He probably is the only wise guy in the whole novel, because he realizes that whether it is life under Mr. Jones or life under the new leader of Napoleon, life for the ordinary people is as miserable as it has always been. So, a kind of a wise guy. Then you have Boxer, who is an epitome of dexterity, who is an epitome of hard work, So, he goes on supporting Napoleon with a blind faith. He is an honest guy, but his honesty is placed for a wrong guy, His honesty is placed for a wrong guy. As a result of it, his honesty, his hard work is being misused by the system. And two major human characters are Mr. Jones. Of course, it is his farm. Initially, it was called the Manor Farm, and he abused animals there. As a result of this, all the animals revolted against him. They shove him out and establish a system of their own. That is Mr. Jones, and we have Pikington, another interesting human being, who is the owner of a Foxwood farm just close by. These are something. So, very in a nutshell, if somebody asks you what is the story of Animal Farm, all that you can say is it is the story of a conflict born out of a desire for freedom, an extraordinary desire, noble desire for freedom and equality, which eventually gets corrupted by the consolidation of power in the hands of a select few. In other words, it is a tale of an egalitarian dream turned into a totalitarian nightmare. Now look at this, a dream of egalitarianism turns into a nightmare of totalitarianism, a dream turned sour, something like this. And that particular philosophy is well expressed in the final statement, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Today it has come to, this particular line alone is sufficient to establish the worth of the writer George Orwell in the canon of great literature, something like that. Okay. Now let us take a closer look at the novel and see what happens here, maybe a chapter wise analysis, especially for those of you who have not read it. Okay. We are introduced to all major characters in the novel right in the very first chapter, all the major, like now think of exposition. Of course, we later, if time permits, we are going to apply various elements of fiction. In fact, the plot elements, Freytag's pyramid structure that we discussed, exposition, rising action. Now see how you can apply all that to the novel that you have read. Okay. So in the first part, all the characters, major characters in the novel are introduced. You have Benjamin, the cynical donkey, Boxer and Clover, two hard-working horses, but unfortunately very dumb because they place their trust in the hands of wrong guy. So you have Snowball, Napoleon and Squealer, three dominant pigs. In fact, pigs themselves occupy a major role. They form a part of the ruling class here. Okay. So Snowball, Napoleon, Squealer, three dominant pigs. You have Jessie and Bluebell, two dogs. All of them are introduced right in the very first novel. Now, what happens when the novel begins? Mr. Jones, he is a very irresponsible farm owner. So he drinks a lot, and then he does not take care of the animals, and all the animals are really upset with him because he tortures all the animals, he does not take good care of them, therefore they are not very happy with him. So the moment he goes to bed on a particular night, that is when the novel begins. There is a meeting that has been convened in the old barn where an old major, of course a major pig, he wants to deliver a speech. In fact, he is considered a visionary, all the animals consider him as their leader, undisputed leader. So he has sent a word that the meeting is convened because he wants to share something important there, therefore all of them gather there. So there in that speech, it is a brilliant speech. In fact, for those of you who want to read some brilliant speeches, this too comes under that. Please read the entire speech, can run into it runs into a couple of pages. And in brief, the speech is all about how human beings, especially Jones, has been continuously torturing animals, and how animals too have an equal right and they too are entitled to their freedom and all that, and they too need to be treated fairly and equally. And that is the reason why they need to, in order for animals to achieve their dream of equality and being treated in a very fair manner, they need to rebel against this oppression and then form their own rule, create a set of governance wherein they run their own society, something like this. This is the dream that he has. As this is a part of old Major's utopia, of course you can think of Karl Marx's vision here, because the old Major symbolizes Karl Marx, or he even symbolizes Lenin's idealism and all these things. Okay. So now all the animals are impressed. Now in the meeting they also come up with Beasts of England, which is later adopted as some kind of a national anthem or the farm anthem. Okay. And the Major, he is simply called Old Major, he also shares a strange dream or a vision wherein he sees the earth without any human beings, because that is their ultimate vision, right? Because human beings here come to represent tyranny, they come to represent oppression, they come to represent totalitarianism. Therefore, how about the world where human beings are not there at all? Therefore, he sows the seeds of rebellion during his speech. This is precisely what happens in chapter 1. Now, this is the anthem, Beasts of England. You can go through that later, and how it talks of idealism, how the song encapsulates all the ideological stuff that old Major delivers in his speech. You can please take a look at it later. Now, in chapter 2, what happens, in fact, you begin tracing the rising action here, because there is a conflict here. What is the conflict? Of course, now all the animals, the seed of rebellion is growing in them. Just a couple of days after his speech, the old Major dies, and now for the next few months, all the animals under the leadership of pigs, now they are preparing the ground for a revolution. In the meanwhile, they gather around, keep chanting the Beasts of England, the national anthem, and keep repeating all animals are equal, keep recalling the dream of the old Major. So, the ground is being paved for the creation of a rebellion, and one day it so happens, of course, revolution comes without actually their knowing it. One day, in his drunken stupor, Mr. Jones forgets to feed the animal. After a day's hard work, he forgets to feed the animal and goes to sleep, and this is too much. All the animals now break into the barn, because they know that Jones has stored all food there. So, they break into the barn and they are eating. That's when Jones gets up, and now he comes with a whip, and he wants to punish animals for this act. He considers it a defiance, whereas it's a simple act of eating food because they are hungry, right? So, that's when all of them come together and successfully drive Jones away from the farm. So, without actually their realizing it, revolution has happened, and they have succeeded in driving away Jones, and this is when animalism, the doctrine, the central doctrine that old Major had taught, comes into effect, and animalism, and with its seven commandments, now occupies the wall of the old the old barn. So, what is this animalism, and what are these 7 commandments? So, here are the 7 commandments. Like the ideals of communism that you have talked of, ideals of Marxism. So, this is animalism. Of course, you must have already found out the similarities there. Now, these are the 7 noble commandments. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy, whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Second one, no animal shall wear clothes, no animal shall sleep in a bed, because and no animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill any other animal, because they represent the vices of human beings, right? That is the reason why they are all taboos. And finally, all animals are equal. This is an extraordinary 7 commandments they chalk up, and they also, it is something like a constitution. The animals chalk out their constitution, and this is their constitution. So, if you ask a question, supposing there is a question, what do you mean by animalism? You can simply say that animalism is, it's a doctrine, it's philosophy based on the ideals of the old Major, that all animals are equal and have right to freedom from the tyranny. Snowball, Napoleon, Squealer, under the leadership of pigs, develop a philosophy or doctrine into a political ideology and simply call it animalism. The tenets of these doctrine are expressed beautifully and pithily in the 7 commandments painted on a barn wall. So, this is animalism. Okay. Chapter 3 is also very, very important, because now that they have taken over the farm, now it falls under their responsibility, because now how will they eat, because so, and how will they function? Now, pigs, because of their ability to read and write, in fact, in the 2nd chapter, Pigs have begun picking up reading and writing a bit faster than other animals. As a result of that, they are intellectually superior, it is established. So, now they take up the task of running the farm, this farmland, and then providing food for all the animals and establishing some kind of governance, because in the absence of that, how would everybody eat, how would everybody function. So, they take up the task. So, especially Snowball and Napoleon emerge as major leaders, and Squealer is appointed as a kind of mouthpiece, because whatever the policies that pigs develop under Snowball and Napoleon's leadership, Squealer disseminates it among all other animals. So, in other words, Squealer represents the media, or especially the print journalism that was there during Stalin's time, and how Stalin misused even that, because using the journalism, using the print medium, he distorted the ideals of Lenin's, and then of course he consolidated power in his hands, and of course journalism played a major role in the corruption of those ideals. So, Squealer represents that. And of course, because some animals find it very difficult to remember all the commandments, Snowball helps in reducing the entire constitution into one simple and single slogan: 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Yeah, of course, it is reductivistic in many sense, not just philosophically, but even literally, because there are also hens there, birds there. So, the birds and hens, they protest because they have 2 legs. Then Squealer convinces them, don't worry, because your your wings are also apart. You can also call your wings as legs, therefore you too have 4 legs, something like that. And now because now there is no ruler, all the animals decide, except 1 or 2 animals and birds, they decide to work hard. So, they cooperate among themselves and decide to harvest. So, all of them work wonderfully, and especially Boxer. I said Boxer symbolizes hard work, perseverance, and his personal motto becomes, I will work harder, and he works. He starts doing the work of 3 horses together, something like that. Yeah. So, now that pigs have assumed governance, the fall begins. In fact, the seeds of the fall, the descent of pigs, the fall of pigs starts from here, because now now all the harvest is stored at one particular place, and the cow's milk and eggs, it's stored in one particular place. Now, what do these pigs do, especially Snowball and Napoleon? Without very stealthily they start drinking milk, and without letting other animals enjoy this, they start drinking milk. So, corruption, the seeds of corruption have already begun sprouting here. It's very unfortunate, but it begins happening. So, these are some it's a quick recap of what happens in the novel. Okay. So, let us take up the remaining chapters in the next class, all right, and maybe afterwards we can discuss the novel and see where it goes. Okay. See you in the next class.